Welcome to my channel, and today I want to share a story that shows how quiet authority and unwavering integrity can change everything. It's about a man who walked into a bank, was dismissed and profiled by staff, but with just one calm phone call turned the tables, revealing who really held the power, and teaching everyone a lesson about respect, dignity, and the real meaning of professionalism. The teller smacked her counter so hard that the pens trembled in their plastic holders, and her voice rose above the lunchtime noise of Meridian Trust Bank, like a whip cracking through dry air as she barked, "Step away from my station!" Customers glanced up, startled, while she glared at the dark-skinned man standing patiently in front of her, adding with a cold sneer, "We don't cash this kind of money for people like you." Chima Okafor didn't react with anger. Instead, he gathered the documents she had tossed aside with disdain, his expression steady and unreadable, then lifted his phone for a single measured call. 9 minutes later, the vault sealed with a heavy metallic thud. The entire system froze, transactions halted mid-process, and the regional director sprinted inside the branch as if the building were on fire, because the man they had mocked, profiled, and dismissed so confidently wasn't just another walk-in client. He was the owner of the whole institution. The lunch crowd had already filled the lobby with chatter printers, hummed non-stop. Shoes clicked across marble floors, and pens tapped desks in rhythmic impatience. But none of that noise carried the same sharpness as teller Sandra Cole's irritation when she slapped a pile of paperwork onto her counter. "And what exactly is this?" she snapped, as if uncovering a scam. "Some kind of joke?" But Chima stood like someone who had long understood that silence unsettles disrespectful people far more than raised voices ever could. "That is my authorization for a wire transfer," he replied evenly. Sandra scoffed, leaning the papers toward the light like a detective sniffing out forgeries. "A transfer for $50,000? You honestly expect me to believe you have access to that?" A few customers stifled laughs, others shifted awkwardly, but no one stepped in. Sandra continued loudly, enjoying the theater of humiliation. "Do you have real identification? Anything legitimate?" Chima placed his ID gently on the counter, but she barely glanced at it before waving down security. "I need someone at window 3, she barked. A guard approached, his hand hovering near his radio as he asked, "What's happening?" Sandra pointed straight at Chima. "He's attempting an illegal transfer. Probably stole these forms. I'm not processing anything for him." Chima remained unshaken. "Scan my ID. Everything is valid," Sandra bristled. "I don't take orders, especially not from someone walking in here with an attitude." That word, attitude, always crawled out of the mouths of people who had lost control of the situation, but desperately pretended otherwise. Just then, branch manager Thomas Greer strutted over, adjusting his tie with the arrogance of a man who wore authority like a cheap cologne. "What's the problem, Sandra?" she answered loudly, making sure the crowd heard every word. "This man thinks he can stroll in and transfer 50 grand. I told him he might want a bank more suitable." Chima tilted his head slightly. "Suitable for what exactly?" Thomas offered a thin, mocking smile. "For customers who meet our standards." The lobby fell silent. Chima's voice remained calm. "Are you refusing service?" Thomas shrugged. "Call it whatever you want." Chima nodded once, slowly. Understood. Then he stepped aside and made a brief, quiet phone call, as calm and efficient as a surgeon's final instruction before an operation. No one heard the words. No one needed to. For a moment, the bank buzzed as usual, but then everything shifted. The lights flickered, the vault doors clanged shut, and every computer terminal went dark before rebooting in emergency lockdown mode. "What is happening?" Sandra muttered. Thomas hammered his keyboard. "Why are we locked out? Who authorized this?" Every screen displayed a single alert. Branch operations suspended. Executive intervention en route. Sandra's bravado cracked. Thomas's confidence evaporated. Even the guard took a cautious step back. 2 minutes later, the glass doors swung open, and Regional Director Charlotte Adebayo rushed in with 2 corporate officers trailing her, her face tight with panic. "Where is he?" she demanded. Sandra pointed without thinking. "The fraud suspect. He's right there." "Not him," Charlotte snapped sharply. "Him!" She pointed at Chima and hurried over as though approaching a dignitary. "Mr. Okafor, sir, please forgive the delay. We weren't informed you would be visiting this branch today." Sandra's jaw fell open. Thomas stumbled backward. Charlotte faced the staff, her voice slicing through the air. "Explain why Mr. Okafor's transaction was blocked." Thomas sputtered. Sandra offered a shaky excuse. "We thought his documents looked questionable. He didn't look like someone who—" Charlotte raised her hand sharply. "Not another word!" She turned to the entire lobby. "This man is not just a customer." Her eyes locked onto Sandra and Thomas. "He is the majority shareholder of Meridian Trust Bank. Every branch, every account, every employee. He oversees the entire institution." A shockwave rippled across the room. Even the guards seemed to shrink, as if hoping invisibility might undo the last 10 minutes. Sandra's face turned pale. I didn't know." "That's the problem," Charlotte replied coldly. "You didn't care to know." Chima finally spoke, each syllable like a quiet verdict. "I came here today as an ordinary client. I expected professionalism, not profiling. Respect is not something you distribute selectively." Charlotte nodded. "Understood." Effective immediately. Sandra Cole and Thomas Greer are relieved of duty pending termination review. Security will escort you to gather your belongings. Sandra broke into tears. "Please, I need this job. If I had known—" Chima stepped forward slightly, his expression unbending. "Respect is not reserved for the powerful. Every customer deserves dignity, regardless of your assumptions." Security escorted the disgraced pair toward the exit as several customers filmed, capturing the same kind of humiliation Sandra once delivered so easily to others. Charlotte turned back. "Mr. Okafor, your transfer will be completed in a private office with full accommodations." Chima shook his head. "No need. I've already moved the funds to another institution." A heavy silence settled. Everyone understood what that meant. Millions withdrawn, reputations damaged, consequences inevitable. Chima added calmly, "Expect a board review this afternoon, not just for this branch, for the entire region." Charlotte bowed slightly. "We will prepare." Chima walked toward the doors, each step echoing through a lobby that now understood precisely who they had demeaned. Before stepping outside, he turned back. "No one should need authority to receive respect," he said quietly. "If a system only behaves when watched, it isn't a system, it's a warning." Then he stepped into the sunlight, leaving behind a staff shaken into silence, while the story began spreading across the city like wildfire. The automatic doors slid shut behind Chima Okafor as he stepped onto the bright sidewalk, but inside the branch the tension thickened like dusty Harmattan air before a storm, and every employee stood frozen. Some out of fear, others from guilt, and a few because they had just witnessed a lesson they knew would echo far beyond the marble floor they were standing on. Charlotte Adebayo remained still for a long moment, her breath uneven as she processed the enormity of what had unfolded in less than 10 minutes, a whirlwind capable of reshaping careers, policies, and reputations throughout the entire region. Employees whispered in clusters, their voices trembling as they replayed every word Sandra and Thomas had thrown at Chima, realizing too late how every sneer, every assumption, every unguarded insult had been directed at the one man who held the power to close the very branch they relied on. Some of them sank into their chairs, shaken by the knowledge that their silence, their refusal to intervene, and their willingness to let disrespect pass unchecked had made them complicit in the humiliation. Customers lingered too, exchanging looks filled with disbelief. Some ashamed they hadn't stepped in, others secretly grateful to have witnessed what they knew would become one of those stories that travels through cities and villages like a proverb, warning, teaching, exposing. While the murmurs continued, Charlotte stepped toward the center of the lobby, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she motioned for the remaining staff to gather closer. Her voice, usually measured and steady, carried an undercurrent of urgency. "What happened today," she began, "will not be buried, excused, or softened." Her tone made even employees, who had been innocent bystanders, stand straighter, suddenly aware that today's events marked the beginning of something far larger than disciplinary action. "Our institution will not tolerate profiling, prejudice, or any behavior rooted in assumptions," she continued. If Mr. Okafor had been any other customer, which he intended to be, that treatment is still unacceptable. The room remained silent. Not a single employee dared to shift or clear a throat. Every client who walks through these doors deserves dignity, and today, we failed. Her eyes swept over each person. Not just Sandra, not just Thomas. This branch failed. Several employees lowered their heads, unable to meet her gaze. Others clenched their jaw, wrestling with their shame. While Charlotte addressed the staff, the guard who had hovered near his radio earlier, Okachukwu, a former soldier known for his calm demeanor, stood by the entrance, replaying the moment he'd taken sides without question, his stomach twisting as he realized how easily he'd allowed appearance to dictate suspicion. He exhaled, heavily, rubbing the back of his neck before turning to Charlotte. "Madam," he said quietly, "I owe that man an apology, even if he never hears it." Charlotte nodded, appreciating the honesty. "We all do." Meanwhile, the two corporate officers who had accompanied her moved to the branch manager's office and began reviewing the security footage, the audio logs, and the telesystem entries. Their expressions tightened as they pieced together the timeline. Sandra's dismissive gestures, Thomas's arrogant posture, the mocking laughter from some customers, and finally, the moment everything shifted with a single phone call. In one corner of the lobby, an older customer, a retired teacher named Mama Ichwoma, shook her head slowly, clutching her handbag against her chest. "I've lived long enough to see many things," she whispered to the woman beside her. "But the way people treat others when they believe no one important is watching, that tells you the true condition of a person's heart." The woman next to her nodded in agreement. "It is always the quiet ones with real power. People forget that." As customers finally began to leave, conversations rippled through them like wind blowing across tall grass. Some spoke in low tones about how Sandra had always carried herself as though she were above everyone else, noting this wasn't the first time she'd spoken down to certain customers. Others recalled instances where Thomas showed favoritism to wealthy clients while treating others with condescension. And they wondered aloud how the branch had let such behavior fester unchecked for so long. A few younger customers shook their heads in amazement, impressed not by Chima's wealth but by his restraint, by the dignity he'd maintained even when insulted. "If it were me," one murmured, "I might have shouted, maybe walked out angry. But the way he stayed calm, that's real power." Outside, as the news began to spread through social media, quick posts appeared with snippets of the incident. Someone captured Sandra's loud accusations on video. Another filmed the moment Charlotte entered the building in a panic. And yet another caught the exact instant Chima turned to deliver his final words before walking out. Comments multiplied within minutes. "This is why humility matters. People will always reveal who they are when they think you're nobody." The man didn't even raise his voice. That's how you know he's dangerous, but in a good way. While the city buzzed with the unfolding story, inside the bank, Charlotte directed the officers to pull the staff into the conference room for an emergency review and debrief. She emphasized that what occurred was not an isolated mistake from a single employee, but a reflection of deeper cultural issues within the branch. "We have to rebuild trust," she said, "with our customers and with our own values." As the staff gathered, emotions ran high. One of the senior tellers, Adaobi, who had worked at the bank for over a decade, stood up and spoke with a trembling voice. "We allowed this environment to grow," she admitted. "We looked away when we should have spoken up. Silence is also a form of approval." Her words hit the room hard. Even those who had prided themselves on treating customers well felt the truth of what she said. It wasn't enough to privately disagree with bad behavior. Doing nothing had enabled it. Meanwhile, across the city, Chima walked through the busy afternoon streets, his phone silent, his pace steady, but his mind turning over details that most would never consider. He had gone to the branch that day specifically because he wanted to see how his staff treated people when they didn't know the man standing before them held the keys to their future. He wanted truth, not reports or polished presentations, but reality. And he had found it. Some might have stormed into the branch with entourage and authority, but not Chima. His wealth had never been the source of his identity. He valued humility, fairness, and character. Lessons instilled in him by a mother who once sold fresh vegetables at a roadside stall, and a father who woke before dawn each day to run a small workshop that barely paid the bills. His parents had taught him that dignity isn't determined by clothes, money, or status, but by how a person treats others, especially those they believe offer nothing in return. Today proved just how deeply those lessons mattered. Across the city, the story picked up momentum. Radio hosts discussed it, bloggers embellished it, office workers replayed the videos on break. Taxi drivers debated who was wrong. Students shared the quotes they found most powerful, and by evening, it had spread far beyond the city, reaching neighboring regions, inspiring conversations about customer service, bias, leadership, and silent power. Meanwhile, back at the bank, the conference room felt like a courtroom. Charlotte delivered corrective action notices. Officers outlined mandatory reform training. Employees signed statements acknowledging their role, direct or indirect, in the harmful culture that had taken root. And all the while, the knowledge that Chima himself would lead the regional review weighed heavily on everyone present. Not because they feared punishment, but because they now understood the magnitude of the mistake they had made, not recognizing a man, esse humanity. And as twilight washed over the bank's glass windows, one thought settled into the minds of staff like a heavy stone: respect should never be conditional. The moment it becomes selective, a system begins to rot quietly from within. It settled over the city like a slow-moving curtain as the streetlights flickered awake, casting long golden reflections across the glass exterior of Meridian Trust Bank. But inside the building, the atmosphere remained heavy, as if the walls themselves were still replaying every harsh word, every careless insult, every moment of arrogance that had unfolded earlier that afternoon. Charlotte Adebayo finally stepped out of the conference room, her shoulders tense and her mind spinning with the weight of what still lay ahead. Because she knew the emergency debrief was only the beginning. The real reckoning would unfold the next morning when reports reached the boardroom, and Chima Okafor's quiet but devastating statement, "Expect a review for the entire region," would ignite conversations that no one could hide from. Meanwhile, the employees dispersed in small clusters, whispering anxiously, their faces tight with worry as they gathered their belongings, replaying their own roles in the day's events, questioning whether they had truly been innocent or simply comfortable bystanders who watched injustice without daring to interrupt it. Some of them still felt the sting of shame, especially those who had smirked when Sandra questioned Chima's ability to transfer money, their own biases exposed under the bright fluorescent lights. At the far end of the lobby, the janitor, a soft-spoken man named Tunde, leaned on his mop and muttered to himself as he cleaned the spot where Sandra had slammed the documents earlier. "If only people knew how to swallow pride," he said quietly, shaking his head. "Respect is free, it doesn't cost anything." His simple words carried more truth than half the training manuals stacked in the back office. Across town, Chima walked into his penthouse with the same calm demeanor he had worn throughout the incident, but the moment the door closed behind him, he exhaled deeply, allowing himself a brief pause as he set his phone on the counter. His home was spacious, elegant, with warm lighting and African art pieces decorating the walls, each one a reminder of where he came from and the values rooted deep within him. He loosened his tie and moved toward the balcony overlooking the city, a sprawling landscape of life, ambition, struggle, and opportunity, all woven together like threads in a vast Ankara fabric. He leaned on the railing, his eyes tracing the movement of cars below, thinking about how quickly power could change the behavior of people, how easily respect was given to wealth while withheld from humanity. He remembered his mother's voice, soft, firm, wise, as she once told him, "My son, a person's character shows brightest when they think no one important is watching." Today, that truth proved itself yet again. Inside his home office, he reviewed the messages flooding his phone, board members asking for details, journalists requesting statements, business partners expressing shock. He ignored most of them. Chima had never been interested in public spectacle. What mattered to him was reform, not applause. He drafted a short memo outlining the immediate review he expected from all regional leaders and closed his laptop without a hint of triumph. This incident wasn't a victory, he reminded himself. It was a warning, a mirror revealing what many institutions refuse to see. Meanwhile, Charlotte sat in her car in the bank's parking lot long after everyone else had left, the engine off, her forehead resting against the steering wheel as she battled the sinking feeling in her stomach. She had always prided herself on integrity, had always believed she ran a fair and disciplined region, but today proved that under her watch, a culture of quiet prejudice had grown unchecked. It wasn't her intention, but intention and impact rarely aligned when oversight grew too distant. She finally lifted her head, her mind sharp with determination. "Tomorrow we rebuild," she whispered to herself, "properly this time." In another part of town, Sandra Cole sat in her small apartment surrounded by silence so thick it felt suffocating. She had cried all the way home. Makeup smeared, eyes swollen, her hands trembling as she replayed the moment Charlotte revealed Chima's identity. She had spent years acting superior behind the counter, believing she could read customers simply by their appearance. She convinced herself that her instinct was always right. Now she realized how wrong she had been, not because Chima had turned out to be wealthy, but because she had treated someone with contempt based solely on her assumptions. Her career was over, her reputation ruined, and she had no one to blame but herself. As she stared at the termination notice in her hand, she whispered into the empty room, "Why didn't I just listen? Why did I think he was less?" Her tears came again, heavier this time, not from fear but from shame. Across the hall, Thomas Greer sat in his dimly lit living room with a drink he could barely swallow. He had once walked through the branch like a king on a throne, convinced that customers needed him more than he needed them. Now he sat slumped on his couch, realizing the arrogance he wore like a badge had been stripped away in front of everyone. He remembered the look Chima gave him, calm, unbothered, almost pitying, and it burned deeper than any insult. But unlike Sandra, Thomas didn't feel remorse yet. He felt anger at being humiliated, anger at losing power, anger at the fact that a man he dismissed as unimportant had more authority than anyone in the branch. He slammed his glass on the table, muttering, "He should have said who he was." But deep down, in the place he refused to acknowledge, he knew the real truth. If Chima had revealed his identity up front, they would have treated him with fake smiles and polished voices, and the rot would have remained hidden. Meanwhile, in the staff WhatsApp group, messages poured in. Some blaming Sandra, some blaming Thomas, some blaming themselves, and a few recognizing the deeper issue. One message from Adeobi stood out. "This is not about who he is, it's about who we became." The night stretched on, each person wrestling with the events in their own way, but the city outside continued moving, unaware that inside boardrooms and living rooms and quiet apartments, a lesson was taking root, one that would redefine an entire organization. And somewhere on a radio station, an evening host retold the story in his deep Nigerian baritone, concluding with words that flowed like a proverb. "When you judge a person by appearance, you risk losing your own humanity. But when you give respect freely, you build a world where dignity is the true currency." Those words drifted through car windows, shop stalls, taxis, and living rooms, spreading the story further, weaving it into the fabric of the night. And all the while, in his quiet home, Chima stood on his balcony, watching the city lights flicker below, knowing that tomorrow would not just be another day, it would be the start of a transformation. Dawn crept into the city with a pale golden glow, stretching across rooftops and waking the streets with the soft hum of early commuters. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the glass facade of Meridian Trust Bank, they illuminated a building preparing for its most uncomfortable but necessary day in years. Inside the regional headquarters, Charlotte Adebayo arrived before anyone else. Her steps brisk, her expression composed yet shadowed with responsibility as she unlocked the conference room and laid out documents for the Emergency Leadership Summit scheduled for 8 o'clock. She felt the weight of every decision pressing against her chest, but beneath that heaviness was a fierce resolve. This time, she wouldn't allow excuses, blind spots, or complacency to bury the truth. One by one, department heads and senior managers began to enter the lobby, their faces drawn with tension, each wondering whether today would threaten their positions or demand accountability they were not prepared to face. The murmurs started immediately. Speculation, denial, guilt, frustration. Yet the air carried something else too. The undeniable knowledge that what happened yesterday could no longer be brushed aside like an inconvenient complaint. Meanwhile, across town, Chima Okafor sat at his breakfast table, scrolling through messages from international partners who had already caught wind of the incident through internal networks. Instead of embarrassment or anger, his expression remained calm, even reflective as he considered the best way to use this moment. Not to punish individuals, but to restructure a culture that had been quietly rotting beneath polished slogans about customer care and equal treatment. He flashed a brief smile at the thought of how the world often underestimated the importance of humility, then closed his tablet and prepared for the morning's executive call. His staff, who had served him loyally for years, moved with their usual efficiency, but they exchanged worried glances, fully aware that today could shift policies from top to bottom. Back at the branch, employees gathered in the break room long before opening hours, their conversations sharp with anxiety. Adaobi leaned against the counter, her arms folded, her voice steady as she addressed a cluster of colleagues who looked as if they hadn't slept. "Whatever happens today," she said quietly, "we need to own our part. Pretending we didn't see the problem won't save us. Facing it might." Some nodded, others looked away, but her words lingered in the air long after she walked out. In her small apartment, Sandra Cole sat on her couch surrounded by boxes she'd begun packing in a daze because she knew the bank would never take her back. Shame clung to her like a second skin as she scrolled through social media, where the story had begun to circulate anonymously. Blurred images, vague descriptions, dramatic retellings, each post twisting the knife a little deeper. She read one comment that said people like that shouldn't work with the public, and the words echoed painfully inside her. She whispered to herself, "I should have just treated him right. That's all it took." But regret, heavy and late, could not rebuild a career shattered in a single afternoon. Meanwhile, Thomas Greer stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie, jaw clenched, eyes hard, trying to convince himself that today's meeting was unnecessary, unfair, even biased. He muttered under his breath, "One mistake, one day. And they act like I've been committing crimes." But deep inside, that smaller, softer voice, the one he hated, whispered the truth he wasn't ready to face. It wasn't one day, it was years of unchecked arrogance and entitlement. As he grabbed his briefcase and headed to the car, he pushed the thought away with the force of denial. Across the city, the regional headquarters buzzed as executives filled the conference room, their suits crisp, but their expressions uneasy. When Charlotte stepped to the front of the room, silence spread like a wave. She looked at every face, some defensive, some fearful, some genuinely troubled, and began with a voice steady enough to command attention. Yesterday's incident is not about embarrassment. It is not about hierarchy. It is about a culture that has failed. And that ends now. She presented the full report, including witness statements, digital logs, and procedural breaches so glaring they made several managers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Questions erupted, some defensive, some probing, some desperate, but Charlotte held her ground like a seasoned warrior leading a truth-telling ritual. Then the incoming call notification appeared on the screen. Executive Director, West Africa Region. The room fell silent. Chima's face appeared, calm but unreadable, and even through the screen, his presence carried authority. He thanked the team for gathering, acknowledged the seriousness of the issue, and then delivered a message that would ripple across every branch. "We will not solve this by firing a few people and pretending the system is healthy. We are restructuring training, customer relations, oversight, and disciplinary measures across all regions. We will rebuild trust from the ground up." His voice remained even, unaccusing, but the truth in his words struck every listener with the weight of consequence. "And," he continued, "we will begin here, in this region, because this is where the mirror was held up." After the call ended, the room erupted into debates, suggestions, confessions, apologies, raw, unfiltered human reactions, and Charlotte guided the discussion with firm leadership. Meanwhile, in the main branch, Employees lined up for a mandatory ethics session, some fidgeting, some whispering, all aware that nothing would be the same after today. Customers watched through the glass as staff moved with unusual tension. The city hummed around them, unaware of the internal storm reshaping the bank's core. And miles away, Chima returned to his balcony with a cup of tea, the morning breeze brushing against him as he thought about how transformation always began. Quietly, uncomfortably, but inevitably, with truth. He watched the sun rise fully, casting warm light over the skyline, and whispered a silent reminder of a proverb his father once taught him. A house built on respect stands longer than a tower built on pride. He knew the journey ahead would be long, but the foundation had been laid. Change was no longer optional. It was in motion. The teller, Adana Okoro, slammed the counter so hard the pens rattled. "Step back from my desk," she barked loud enough for the customers to stare. "We don't cash this type of money for people like you." The dark-skinned man, Chinedu Obiora, did not raise his voice. He calmly gathered the documents she had thrown aside and made a single, quiet call. 9 minutes later, the vault locked, the branch froze, and the regional director, Ngozi Eze, sprinted through the doors, because the man they had mocked, profiled, and denied service to was no ordinary client. He was the owner of the bank. The midday rush at Unity Trust Bank was already loud, with printers humming, pens clicking, and conversations echoing off the polished marble walls. But nothing was sharper than Adana Okoro's voice as she slapped a stack of papers onto her counter like she had uncovered a crime. "What is this supposed to be?" she demanded. "A joke?" Chinedu stood still, like someone who had learned long ago that silence unsettles the disrespectful more than anger ever could. "It's my authorization for a wire transfer," he said evenly. "N50 million? Adana scoffed, tilting the papers toward the light as if they were fake. "N50 million? You expect me to believe you have this kind of money?" A few customers turned to watch. Some laughed quietly. Others shifted uncomfortably but stayed silent. Adana didn't lower her voice. "Do you have real identification? Something legitimate?" Chinedu placed his ID on the counter. She ignored it. "Security?" she barked. "I need someone at window 3. A guard approached, hand near his radio. "What's happening?" "This man is trying an illegal transfer. Probably found these forms somewhere." "I won't process this," Adana said sharply. Chinedu remained calm. "Check the ID. Everything matches." "I don't take orders," Adana snapped. "Especially not from someone walking in here with this attitude." "Attitude?" Chinedu murmured. The word always came from those losing control, but pretending they hadn't. Branch manager Emeka Naji appeared, adjusting his tie with the arrogance of someone who loved authority too much. "What's the issue, Adana?" "This man thinks he can walk in off the street and transfer N50 million, she said loudly. "I suggested he try a more suitable bank?" Chinedu tilted his head. "Suitable for what exactly?" Emeka gave a thin smile. "For customers who meet our standards," he said, and the lobby fell silent. Chinedu measured his words. "Are you refusing service?" Emeka shrugged. "Call it what you want." "Understood," Chinedu said quietly, then stepped aside to make a call. Calm, brief, precise. Nobody heard a word. For half a minute, the bank hummed as usual. Then everything changed. Lights flickered, vault doors clanged shut. System screens went dark, rebooting with emergency protocols. "What the?" Adana muttered. Emeka tapped the keyboard. "Why are we locked out? Who authorized this?" Notifications flashed on every terminal. Branch operations suspended. Executive intervention en route. Adana looked shaken. Emeka looked terrified. The guard stepped back, unsure if he had tried to stop the wrong man. 2 minutes later, the glass doors swung open. Regional Director Ngozi Eze strode in, pale and breathless, flanked by 2 corporate officers. "Where is he?" she asked urgently. Adana pointed at a customer. "The fraud guy." "No, he's—" Ngozi snapped, cutting her off, hurrying toward Chinedu like he was royalty. "Mr. Obiora, I apologize for the delay. We didn't know you were visiting this branch today." Adana's jaw dropped. Emeka stumbled backward. Ngozi turned to the staff, her voice steel. Why was Mr. Obiora's transaction blocked? We thought his documents were questionable, Emeka stuttered weakly. He didn't look like someone who... Not another word! Ngozi raised her hand sharply. This man is not just a customer. He is the majority shareholder of Unity Trust Bank. Every branch, account, and employee is under his oversight. Gasps rippled across the lobby. Even the guard stepped back. Adana's face turned ghost white. I didn't know, she whispered. That's the problem, Ngozi said. You didn't care to know. Chinedu spoke finally, each word measured. I came as a regular client, expecting professionalism. Profiling and disrespect are unacceptable. Ngozi nodded firmly. Understood. Effective immediately. Adana Okoro and Emeka Naji are relieved of duty pending termination review. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. Adana collapsed into tears. Please, I need this job. If only I had known. Chinedu's gaze remained unflinching. Respect isn't reserved for the powerful. Every client deserves dignity. Security led the disgraced pair out, their humiliation recorded by dozens of phones, the same way they had enjoyed witnessing others' shame. Ngozi turned back. Mr. Obiora, your transfer will be processed immediately in a private office with full accommodations. Chinedu shook his head. No need. I've already moved the funds to another institution. Staff swallowed hard. They knew what that meant. Millions in lost deposits. Expect a board review this afternoon. Not just for this branch, but the entire region, he continued. Ngozi bowed her head. We'll be ready. Chinedu walked slowly toward the exit, each step echoing through the lobby that now understood who had been standing before them. Before leaving, he turned back. No one should need power to earn respect, he said softly. If a system only responds when watched, it isn't a system, it's a warning. He stepped into the sunlight as the doors closed behind him. Inside, staff whispered in fear. Outside, the city buzzed with the story that would circulate across every screen for the next 24 hours. And in the boardroom later that evening, a new policy was born. Because of one quiet man, a phone call, and 9 minutes of truth. By the evening, the news of Chinedu Obiora's quiet but commanding presence at Unity Trust Bank had reached every corner of Lagos. Television channels replayed the footage of Adana Okoro and Emeka Naji being escorted out, their humiliation stark against the polished bank lobby, while social media was ablaze with commentary and hashtags praising respect over assumptions. At the central office, Ngozi Eze convened an emergency meeting with all regional managers. The room, usually a place of measured discussions and financial projections, was tense, charged with the weight of what had occurred earlier in the day. Documents were shuffled, phones buzzed, and advisors whispered in corners, but Ngozi's voice cut clearly through the tension. This incident is a lesson, she said. We failed a client because we let assumptions and bias dictate our behavior. From this moment, every branch must implement strict guidelines to ensure dignity, and professionalism is the default, not the exception. Meanwhile, Chinedu Obiora had returned to his office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across his sleek, minimalist workspace. Despite the chaos he had caused without raising his voice, he remained calm, reviewing reports on the bank's operations and preparing for the board meeting later that day. His phone rang briefly, and he answered without irritation, giving precise instructions to ensure the safety and continuity of all his institutions. Back at Unity Trust Bank, security personnel quietly reinforced protocols, and staff who had witnessed the morning's events began reflecting on their own biases and the assumptions they made in daily interactions. Young clerks whispered to each other, not daring to break the silence imposed by respect and fear alike, realizing that professionalism demanded more than procedure. It demanded awareness and humility. Outside the bank, city life carried on, oblivious to the lessons unfolding within polished walls. But social media ensured that no citizen remained unaware of the day when assumptions were confronted by quiet authority. By evening, Chinedu's private legal and communications team drafted new policies emphasizing customer dignity, zero tolerance for profiling, and the requirement for all employees to undergo bias and ethics training. Plans were made to review not just the Lagos branches, but every regional office under his control, ensuring no staff could again mistake ignorance for authority. Even Adana and Emeka, sitting in separate offices across the city with legal advisors, felt the sting of accountability. Yet, Chinedu's actions, measured and silent, demonstrated that consequences need not be loud to be transformative. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a golden hue, Chinedu Obiora walked to his balcony, looking over Lagos with a quiet satisfaction. Not for the millions that had moved that day, nor the authority he wielded, but for the principle proven. Respect is universal, and power is true only when coupled with fairness. Inside, systems were reviewed, protocols revised, and the bank's culture irrevocably shifted, all because one man chose calm, dignity, and the certainty of justice over confrontation. The story would ripple through financial institutions across Nigeria and eventually the continent. A cautionary tale for every clerk, manager, and executive. Humility in authority and respect in service were not optional. That night, as the city lights shimmered and the hum of traffic filled Lagos streets, Chinedu Obiora finalized his next steps, ensuring that the 9 minutes of truth that morning were not a fleeting spectacle, but a permanent lesson engraved into the ethos of Unity Trust Bank. The following morning, Chinedu Obiora arrived at the bank's main headquarters before sunrise. The streets of Lagos quiet, except for the occasional motorbike weaving through the early traffic. Inside, his executive team was already assembled, the room filled with the hum of laptops, murmured conversations, and the faint scent of coffee. But all attention quickly focused on him as he entered. He addressed the board calmly but with unmistakable authority. Yesterday was not an isolated incident. It exposed systemic failures in our service culture, a disregard for dignity, and the risks of unchecked assumptions. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. We are implementing immediate measures, mandatory ethics and bias training for all staff, tighter verification protocols, and a zero-tolerance policy for profiling. Branches that fail to comply will face disciplinary actions, up to and including termination. The board members exchanged glances, some apprehensive, some admiring the precision and foresight in his plan. Chinedu continued, outlining the timeline for evaluations, the mechanisms for reporting misconduct, and the strategy for restoring public confidence in Unity Trust Bank. Meanwhile, public relations teams were drafting statements for media release, highlighting the bank's renewed commitment to ethical conduct and customer respect. Outside, news of the policy changes spread quickly. Journalists interviewed staff members who had witnessed Chinedu's calm handling of the previous day's events, emphasizing the importance of accountability and professionalism over appearances and assumptions. Across Lagos, in smaller branches and even rural offices under his supervision, managers held emergency meetings to ensure every employee understood that respect was non-negotiable, that actions had consequences, and that even the quietest clients could command the highest levels of attention if treated unfairly. By afternoon, Chinedu convened a review of all pending transactions affected by the previous incident, personally ensuring that no customer was disadvantaged and that the bank's financial integrity remained intact. He met individually with Adana Okoro and Emeka Naji, explaining that while their positions could not be restored due to the severity of their misconduct, the purpose of their removal was to reinforce a broader cultural shift. A clear message that bias, arrogance, and disrespect were unacceptable at any level. As he walked through the headquarters later, observing staff moving with renewed diligence and attentiveness, Chinedu reflected on how one quiet, deliberate action could ripple outward, reshaping expectations and inspiring systemic change. Outside, Lagos continued its bustling rhythm, unaware of the intricate maneuvers inside boardrooms and offices, yet indirectly influenced by the principles now instilled in the bank's core operations. By evening, Chinedu prepared for a continental conference call with partners in other countries, sharing lessons from Unity Trust Bank, advocating for the adoption of customer-first ethics and emphasizing that integrity, calm authority, and respect were as vital as financial performance in sustaining a successful institution. As he concluded the call, the sun set over the Lagos skyline, the city alive with the noise of commerce and life. But within the walls of Unity Trust Bank, a quiet revolution had taken hold. An institutional culture reshaped not by confrontation or spectacle, but by calm decisiveness, ethical rigor, and the principle that dignity and respect were the foundations of lasting power. In the days that followed, Unity Trust Bank began to feel the impact of Chinedu Obiora's interventions. Staff at every branch were suddenly acutely aware of their behavior, their assumptions, and the consequences of misjudging a client. Training sessions were conducted, workshops held, and role-playing exercises introduced to instill a culture of respect and vigilance, while internal audits monitored compliance with the new directives. Customers, many of whom had heard of the incident through news reports and social media, began arriving at branches with renewed confidence, reassured that their dignity would be upheld regardless of their appearance or status. Adana Okoro and Emeka Naji became cautionary examples. Their story discussed in management meetings as a stark reminder that arrogance and profiling could undo careers in an instant. Across Lagos, other financial institutions watched closely, debating whether to adopt similar protocols after witnessing the immense positive response from the public and the press coverage that celebrated ethical service. Chinedu himself moved with quiet precision, attending to strategic decisions, monitoring the transfer of funds to secure institutions, and personally reviewing any anomalies flagged by the new system. He also scheduled regular visits to branches, ensuring that his presence reinforced the seriousness of the policy changes and that employees internalized the principle that respect is non-negotiable. By the end of the first month, Unity Trust Bank had already begun to show measurable improvements. Complaints related to staff behavior dropped dramatically, transaction errors decreased, and overall customer satisfaction ratings soared. Internally, employees reported feeling more motivated, more accountable, and more engaged. Understanding that their actions now had real implications and that even small gestures of respect or negligence could ripple through the organization. News outlets continued to highlight Chinedu's leadership, portraying him not merely as a wealthy shareholder, but as a transformative figure who had reshaped the culture of an entire financial institution. His quiet authority, decisive action, and unwavering insistence on ethical conduct became a model cited in leadership seminars, business schools, and professional forums. And through it all, Chinedu remained the same. Calm, composed, and deliberate, refusing to be distracted by fame or accolades, focused instead on ensuring that systems worked, that people were treated fairly, and that respect and integrity formed the bedrock of every transaction. As Lagos moved through its usual rhythm of traffic, commerce, and city life, the story of one man's quiet action, a 9-minute phone call, and a clear demonstration of authority without aggression, became an enduring lesson. Power is amplified, not by loud displays or intimidation, but by principled, disciplined, and ethical leadership. In the months that followed, the incident at the Unity Trust Bank branch became a case study in operational management and corporate culture, inspiring workshops, seminars, and articles across Africa. Chinedu's quiet, calculated insistence on respect and dignity had not only reshaped his own institution, but had begun influencing a broader shift in business ethics, showing that the ripples of a single act of composure and integrity could extend far beyond a single building, affecting employees, clients, institutions, and communities alike, and ensuring that the principle of treating everyone with fairness and humanity would remain an indelible part of the bank's identity for years to come. By the time the next board meeting convened, Chinedu Obiora had already ensured that every branch report, every audit, and every incident log had been thoroughly reviewed. The meeting room was tense, filled with executives who knew that the events at the Lagos branch had set a precedent they could not ignore. Chinedu began calmly. Yesterday, and in the days following, we witnessed the results of a culture that allowed assumptions to dictate behavior. We cannot allow this to happen anywhere in our network. He outlined the long-term measures: comprehensive employee evaluations tied to ethical performance, public recognition for exemplary conduct, and continuous monitoring to prevent profiling. He emphasized mentorship programs for younger staff, encouraging senior employees to model professionalism and respect. Every branch manager was required to submit a report detailing how they were ensuring that respect and dignity were embedded in daily operations. Chinedu then turned to the financial overview, noting how, despite the public spectacle, Unity Trust Bank's deposits and transfers had remained secure, highlighting the importance of disciplined, ethical oversight. Questions were asked, concerns raised, but Chinedu answered each with calm precision, ensuring everyone understood that accountability would now extend to all levels of the institution, from the teller window to the boardroom. By the afternoon, news had spread further across Nigeria and neighboring countries, with business leaders, government officials, and even academic institutions analyzing the incident as a landmark lesson in ethics, power, and leadership. Employees throughout the bank reported a renewed sense of purpose, inspired not by fear, but by a clear understanding that respect and diligence were non-negotiable, and that even the smallest acts of arrogance could have serious consequences. In staff lounges, managers discussed the example set by Chinedu's quiet authority, sharing stories of the viral video, the 9-minute call, and the disciplined response that transformed what could have been chaos into a blueprint for integrity. Meanwhile, Chinedu continued his personal routine, visiting branches, speaking with customers, and reviewing operations, each interaction reinforcing the principle that dignity must never be contingent on wealth, appearance, or status. By evening, Lagos had settled into its familiar rhythm, the hum of the city carrying on, yet within the walls of Unity Trust Bank, a permanent transformation had taken place. Across the country, students of business and ethics studied the incident. Corporate trainers used it to illustrate the impact of measured action, and journalists framed it as a story of quiet power and uncompromising principle. Chinedu Obiora's decision to act calmly, to enforce respect through clarity and authority rather than aggression, became a defining moment in African corporate leadership, showing that systems, institutions, and communities could be reshaped by integrity and courage. And as the sun set over Lagos, casting the city in shades of gold and orange, Chinedu looked out from his office balcony, reflecting on how 9 minutes one quiet phone call and the insistence on fairness had not only corrected an immediate wrong, but had ensured that respect, dignity, and accountability would remain at the heart of Unity Trust Bank for generations to come, proving once and for all that the quietest actions often have the loudest impact. In the weeks following the dramatic events at the Lagos branch, the transformation within Unity Trust Bank became increasingly evident. Staff members at all levels adjusted their behavior, conscious of the new standards that Chinedu Obiora had set, and management reported noticeable improvements in both client interactions and operational efficiency. Idana Okoro and Emeka Naji had exited the bank, their names becoming a cautionary tale. But their absence created space for a new culture to flourish, one grounded in respect, accountability, and professional conduct. Customers returned with renewed trust, many remarking that the way the bank handled the incident demonstrated a level of integrity they had rarely seen. Chinedu continued to lead by example, moving quietly through branches, observing staff, speaking directly with clients, and ensuring that every corner of the institution upheld the values he had reinforced. Training programs became routine, mentorship initiatives thrived, and internal audits were used not as punitive measures, but as tools to foster awareness, self-reflection, and improvement. Beyond Lagos, neighboring cities began to adopt similar approaches in their own institutions, inspired by the viral video and the story of one man's calm assertion of dignity and authority. Business leaders, journalists, and academics cited the Unity Trust Bank incident as a benchmark for corporate ethics, emphasizing how quiet decisiveness and unwavering principle could reshape organizational culture and public perception. Chinedu himself remained unassuming, focused not on recognition, but on results, ensuring funds moved securely, customers were treated fairly, and employees understood that respect and integrity were non-negotiable. By the end of the quarter, Unity Trust Bank reported record improvements in customer satisfaction, employee engagement, and operational compliance, proving that ethical leadership was not only morally right, but also strategically advantageous. The incident became a permanent case study, referenced in leadership seminars, business courses, and ethics workshops, highlighting the ripple effect of one 9-minute call, one act of quiet authority, and the principle that respect should never be conditional. As Lagos thrived around him, Chinedu Obiora looked out from his office balcony, the city's skyline illuminated by the evening sun, reflecting on the power of patience, composure, and ethical courage. He understood that lasting change was cultivated not through force or spectacle, but through consistent, principled action. And so, the story of that day of the teller's arrogance, the branch manager's assumptions, and one man's unwavering insistence on respect became more than a viral sensation. It became a blueprint for leadership, an enduring lesson in dignity, and a testament to the fact that integrity, calm authority, and fairness could reshape not only a bank, but the very culture of service across an entire nation. This story reminds us that respect should never depend on wealth, appearance, or status. True power isn't about shouting or forcing people to obey. It's about integrity, calm action, and holding yourself to the highest standards, no matter the situation. Let this be a lesson for everyone. Treat others with dignity, act with patience, and remember that one quiet, principled choice can create ripple effects far beyond what you can imagine. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: respect is earned through fairness, and real leadership rises quietly, yet leaves a lasting mark. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share with your friends and family so you don't miss the next powerful story coming your way. Drop a heart in comment, like and subscribe my channel, and visit my channel for more interesting stories videos.